Thank you, Professor Anil Kumar. Good afternoon and welcome to the Department of Ancient Indian History, Culture and Archaeology, Visva-Bharati. Today we have among us Professor A.I.H.C, who will deliver the 6th Professor B.T. Chattopadhyaya Memorial Lecture Series. Professor Osman hardly needs an introduction. He is a numismatist, art historian and archaeologist. He is the Emeritus Director of Research of the French National Center for Scientific Research, Paris, former adjunct professor of Central and South Asian Art, Archaeology and Numismatics, University of California, Berkeley, and former visiting professor and member of the Doctoral School of the Paris Sorbonne University. Professor A.I.H.C has written and edited several books and monographs such as Indo-Greek, Indo-Scythian, and Indo-Parthian coins in the Smithsonian Institution in 1993, Origin, Evolution, and Circulation of Foreign Coins in the Indian Ocean jointly with DPN Visva-Bharati in 1998, Rahana and Ancient Civilization Revisited, Numismatic and Archaeological Evidence on Inland and Maritime Trade jointly with R.A. Vikramasinghe, published from Colombo, 1999. The Pleasure Gardens of Siberia, A New Approach, again from Colombo, 2006. From Bactria to Taprobeni in 2 volumes, Manohar, 2015. 7 weeks after the Buddha's enlightenment, Contradictions in Text, Confusions in Art, Manohar, 2016. From Hindu Kush to Salt Range, Morian, Indo-Greek, and Indo-Scythian coin boards, jointly with Shushmita Bosu Majumdar, The Ink Beyond Imagination, Kolkata, 2020. Roots of Sri Lankan Art, Department of Archaeology, Colombo, 2020. When West Met East, Gandharan Art Revisited in 2 volumes, Manohar, 2020. The Greek god Helios and the Indian deity Surya, A Study in the Dissemination of the Sun God Imagery, The Ink, 2021, and several others. He has also edited Early Indian History and Beyond, Essays in Honor of B.T. Chattopadhyaya, jointly with Shuchandra Ghosh, published in 2019 by Primus Books. He is recipient of international awards, French Academy of Inscriptions and Belletria bestowed most prestigious awards to 5 of his books, and George Perrot Medal being the most distinguished one. He was raised to the position of the Order of Academic Palms by the French government and Order of the Constantine the Great by the Greek government. When West Meet East, authored by him, has received the distinguished Ikyo Hirayama Award bestowed by the French Academy. Today, the title of his lecture is Contradictions in the Texts and Confusions in the Iconography, revisiting the great departure theme in ancient Buddhist art. So now I request Professor A.I.H.C to start his presentation. Over to you, sir.
With your permission, we will record this
yes, of course,
and upload it now to YouTube.
This one?
Yes.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I wish to thank Dr. Anil Kumar, Professor and Head of the Department of Ancient Indian History, Culture and Archaeology, Visva-Bharati Shantiniketan for inviting me to deliver this talk in memory of Professor V.D. Chattopadhyaya. Okay, thank you very much. I consider his invitation, Professor Anil Kumar, as a great honor because for me, V.D. Chattopadhyaya was a Yuga Purusha, a man of conviction and integrity. As his vision of history was integrated with the spatial dimensions of the past, both in a physical and cultural sense, and as he believed that historical landscape of India could not be isolated or understood without incorporating the fertile lands south of the Hindu Kush range, he was very interested in the discoveries made there. With vast knowledge rooted in his deep commitment to the idea of plurality as opposed to monolithic approaches in perception of the past and interpretation, he understood that the history of India cannot be written in isolation from the ancient past beyond the Indus. He was very much interested in Buddhist art in Gandhara, and I can still remember whenever I came to India, I never forgot to meet him at the JNU. We would sit on the roof of his house and talk for hours about new discoveries made in Pakistan and Afghanistan, despite the uproar of airplanes flying over his house. BTC asked me to write a book on Gandharan art, which I did. When Dr. Anil Kumar graciously invited me to deliver this talk in the memory of Professor Chattopadhyaya, I proposed a subject related to Gandhara and Buddhism. Contradictions in the text and confusion in the iconography, revisiting the great departure theme in ancient Buddhist art is the title of my today's talk, and humbly dedicate it to his loving memory. Professor V.D. Chattopadhyaya was for me a dear friend, above all, a brother, to whom I shared my joys and sorrows. Important events related to the life of Gautama Buddha are not homogeneously represented in ancient schools of art in South and Southeast Asia, and these differences are due to the confusion and irregularity of the way the events are narrated in sacred texts. Among the many such episodes, the events related to the great departure of the Prince Siddhartha gave rise to major confusions. My today's talk focuses on the following events. What was the final motivation for the Bodhisattva Siddhartha to leave his home and become a wandering ascetic? Did the Bodhisattva leave his wife and the newborn son before becoming a homeless mendicant? How did he escape from his palace where guarded by his father's army? The events surrounding the great departure, Abhinishkamana, of Prince Siddhartha, as described in the text, in particular, gave rise to major, yet at times unnoticed by scholars, disparities in their depictions. Taking this crucial moment in the life of the future Buddha as my focus in this paper, I wish to examine how the Lalita Vistara, the Mahavastu, the Buddha Charita, as well as the Chinese and Tibetan translations of the original Sanskrit text of the Abhinishkamana Sutra and Murasavasravadi Vinaya have inspired the Gandharan artists and their mentors. It is important to emphasize here that the Lalita Vistara is a Sanskrit Buddhist text of great significance, most likely composed in Gandhara 150 CE. It is believed that 4 successive stages of its composition led to different versions reflected today in the Sanskrit text, in the Chinese translations by Dharmaraksha in 308 and by Divakara in the 7th century. In contrast, the Pali Vidhana Katha, the introductory chapter of the Jataka Katha, or the commentary of Jatakas, composed in the 5th century CE by Buddhaghosa in Sri Lanka, based on the older commentary in Elu or Old Sinhala, inspired the Canadian period painters in Sri Lanka and to a certain extent, depictions at Buddhist viharas in Southeast Asia. I want to point out sensitive connections between text and image in both lineages, aiming at a great understanding of what is portrayed and why. For this presentation, I shall discuss the iconographies of major Indian Buddhist sites such as Sanchi, Bharut, Amaravati, Panigiri, Nagarjunakonda, Kanaganahalli, and Gandhara. Their iconography will be compared with the 18th century paintings of the Buddhist temples of the Canadian period and their contemporary murals from Thailand, Cambodia, and Myanmar. The release from Borobudur, a 9th century Mahayana Buddhist temple in central Java, are of great significance as the sculptures of this monumental temple follow the final Sanskrit version of the Lalita Vistara dated to the 7th century. We learn from the sacred text that in order to encourage the young prince Siddhartha to become an earth conqueror and not to be attracted by the ascetic life, King Suddhodana, his father, arranged a marriage for the prince with a young beautiful princess named Yashodhara and built 3 palaces for the young couple. The Pali Vidhana Katha adds another detail that is not mentioned in the non-Sanskrit text, namely that the prince was crowned as a king, which we see in the paintings of the Canadian period. Yet, in the midst of these worldly pleasures, what made him to leave the luxury life and become itinerant ascetic? Sanskrit texts give 2 different versions of why Prince Siddhartha abandoned his palace, leaving his wife. According to the Lalita Vistara, the Avanishkamana Sutra, and as well as the Pali Vidhana Katha, in the midst of worldly pleasures, Siddhartha, having encountered a decaying old man, a man stricken by disease, a dead man with multitude of relatives weeping and lamenting, and family, finally, and mendicant dressed in saffron garments, understood the impermanence of life and decided to abandon his comfortable life as in search of the truth. This is one of the most evocative sculptures in Gandharan art depicting the encounters with the sick man and the old man. The Bunel Stupa from Gandhara, which I published recently, unfolds in the 3rd register from the top the important events of the life of the Buddha in a chronological sequence. Just to mention that this is the most complete stupa from Gandhara ever found. Not a single piece is missing. It visualizes the Bodhisattva enjoying worldly pleasures in the palace with his wife, leaving the city gates, riding a horse, immediately followed by the scenes of the old man and a man stricken by disease, then Siddhartha spending the final night in the palace. The same stupa, following the chronological order given in the Lalita Vistara and the Avanishkamana Sutra, depicts depicts the great departure immediately after the renunciation scene. A panel from Nagarjuna Konda unfolding particularly broken, partially broken, depicts the Bodhisattva in a chariot meeting a dead man and an old man. The other two encounters should have been on the broken fragment. All these events are showcased following almost to the letter the narration of the Lalita Vistara and the Abhinishkamana Sutra. The Candid period painters also follow a similar sequence narrated in the Nidana Katha. I am showing here mural paintings from the Kathalur Rajamahal in Sri Lanka, built around 1820, and from Maharaja Vihara at Tamulla, Rajamahal Vihara, paints dated to the 18th century. This banner is a copy of one or more wall paintings of the first Vihara linked to the royal palace of Phnom Penh in Cambodia, destroyed in the year 1895. Ademar Leclerc, who was resident mayor from 1899 to 1903 in Phnom Penh, and also and who initiated the project, donated his banner to the Musée Archéologique d'Alençon in France. So this is exhibition that we organize in France in the museum. So these are some of the photographs that we have that I'm showing of the exhibition. Likewise, the murals of, so here we have, so likewise the murals, sorry, often refer to the iconography of the banner in my presentation. Two out of this is a banner painting from Thailand. However, so here we see this is dated to 1825, having vivid depictions of all four encounters, as you can see here. However, Ashwaghosh's Buddha Charita gives a different version of the story according to which the three encounters, old man, sick man, and dead man, take place before the said first meditation. The first meditation of the young prince Siddhartha seems to have confused the visual artists of the past. The main Sanskrit texts that may have inspired Gandhara art have a different version of this episode. Okay, so this was the slide. If there is any disturbance, we'll stop sharing and we'll continue. So, okay, thank you. So sorry for this. So the Parinidhana Katha has a different version of the first meditation of Prince Siddhartha. On the day of the Pine festival, King Suddhodana, leaving his house with a great retinue, took his son, who was a child, a 2-year-old child, went to the spot. Then there was a jambu tree, thick with leaves and giving a dense shade. Under it, King had the child's couch laid out, and over the couch, a canopy spread inlaid with stars, gold, and a round of rounded in a curtain hung. Then, leaving the guard there, the king, clad in splendor and attended by his ministers, went away to plough. The future Buddha, looking all around and seeing no one, got up quickly, seated himself cross-legged, and holding the beard, sank into first meditation. Candian period painters of Sri Lanka depicts the story as the way it is narrated in the Parinidhana Katha. Needless to say, neither Buddhaghosha's Nidhana Katha nor the Sri Lankan murals allude to the ploughing scene that had an impact on the young child's mind, as described in Ashwaghosh's Buddha Charita. All the known Gandharan sculptures depicting the first meditation include the Bodhisattva sitting cross-legged in the shade of a tree. On the base of this sculpture from Saribalol is a peasant ploughing the fields with the traditional Indian plough pulled by two humbuls. As we see, this and the other Gandharan iconographies do not correspond to the narration of the Lalita Vistara in its Sanskrit version, but on the contrary, the Chinese translation of the Lalita Vistara by Dharmaraksha in the 3rd century mentions that the crown prince went with ministers to a village and observed ploughmen and crows and birds pecking at worms that had appeared on the freshly turned earth. I'm extremely sort of with the French translation. This is something I'm working on with my colleague, with Professor Kim. So it is very clear in the first translation of Lalita Vistara, future Buddha sees the worms coming to the surface. Is it necessary to point out that the Gandharan artists had followed the earliest version of the Lalita Vistara, which was later translated into Chinese by Dharmaraksha? The Abhinishkamana Sutra also says that the royal prince, seeing the tired oxen, their necks bleeding from the goad, and men toiling beneath the midday sun, and the bird devouring the helpless insects, his heart was filled with grief. As emphasized earlier, in the Buddha Charita, the 3 encounters, old man, dead man, sick man, take place before the so-called first meditation. The grievances caused by the clumps of grass, dug up by the plows, littering the earth, covering it with dead creatures, insects, and worms, was the final driving force of the Blessed One to leave the palace with the sole intention to find a way to overcome the old age, sickness, and the death. Some Gandharan sculptures depicting the first meditation are consistent with the Buddha Charita in focusing on men ploughing the fields and showing the Bodhisattva as a young man. However, some sculptures do justice to the Lalita Vistara in the Chinese and Sanskrit versions by depicting King Suddhodana kneeling and bowing his son's feet. It seems that the Gandharan artist opted to depict him in the form of a young man in accord with the Buddha Charita of the 2nd century CE and the version of the Lalita Vistara that Dharmaraksha had in the hands of before 3rd century CE during his stay in Gandhara. Let us emphasize again that Gandharan sculptors do not follow the chronological sequence of episodes as narrated in the Buddha Charita, but recently unearthed Torana carving at Panigiri, studied by my colleague Parul in Telangana, does justice to the text given in the Buddha Charita, putting the first meditation after the 3 encounters. So if you look at the beam, first you see the 3 encounters. I'll come to that in a moment. And then we have the first meditation, and then the last night in the palace, and then the great departure. This means to say that Buddha Charita or hitherto unknown similar texts had some inspiration on the Andhra art. The next question that arises in our mind is whether Siddhartha went from home to the home estate, leaving the newly born Rahula on his son. According to the Pali tradition, Rahula was born on the day of Prince Siddhartha's renunciation. At that time, the king who had heard that the mother of Rahula had brought forth a son, sent a message saying, quote, "Make known my joy to my son." The future Buddha, hearing this said, an impediment has come into being, a bond has come into being in Pali. Bandhanam, when the king asked, what did my son say? And heard that saying, he gave the command. from henceforth, let Rahul impediment be my grandson's name.
ये मेरा फेवरेट है.
The narrative relates the Bodhisattva sitting cross-legs on the couch saw the women who had earlier danced and sang and played delightfully now with their stage proportions laid aside, sleeping. Some this is not what I say. Some foaming at the mouth, some grinding their teeth, some yawning, some muttering in their sleep, some gapping, and some with their dress in disorder, plainly revealed as mere horrible sources of mental distress. Seeing this, Prince Siddhartha ordered his groom, Channa, I am resolved today to accomplish the great renunciation, saddle my horse. The banner from Alençon Museum in France, you can see the sleeping women and Channa coming with the horse. According to the same text, Siddhartha thought, I will look at my son. And rising from his cross-legged sitting, he went to the apartment of Rahula's mother and opened her chamber door. The mother of Rahula was sleeping on a bed strewn with many jasmine flowers and resting her hand on the head of his son. Stopping with his foot on the threshold, the Bodhisattva thought, quote, if I lift her hand to take my son, she will awake, and that will prevent my going away. Quotation ends. I will come back and see him when I have become a Buddha. And he left the palace. Respecting this narration of the Pali Nidhana Katha, murals from the Kandyan period in Sri Lanka, as well as of Southeast Asia, intensely depict these episodes. So here you can see the banner from Alençon Museum. So you very clearly see Rahul born there. And again, another banner here, the Walters Museum. Why then did Gandharan artists not attempt to depict Rahula at the critical moment when the future Buddha decides to leave the palace in search of the truth? In contrast to the Pali tradition, the Lalita Vistara makes no mention of Rahula's death. The Lalita Vistara in the 14th chapter relates the 4 encounters: a skinny old man, a man stricken by disease and fouled by his own excrement, a dead man on a palanquin, and mendicant dressed in saffron garments, and a dreadful dream of Yashodhara, which frightened her greatly on the very night the Bodhisattva's departure, but make no reference to their son. In this respect, can we simply infer that since the successive authors of the Lalita Vistara were not interested in the birth of Rahula, that the same was true for the Gandharan artists? The Mahamaster says that Rahula, departing from Tusita heaven, came down into the womb of his mother, Yashodhara, on the day of Bodhisattva's renunciation. The Mahavastu further says that Prince Siddhartha stays in the womb as long as 6 years. Was the maturing of the old karma. Among many others, the most naturalistic reason for the long pregnancy period is that Yashodhara was practicing religious austerities involving fasting, sleeping on a straw bed, which caused Rahula's growth to slow down. One of the karmic stories tells that Yashodhara had to bear the child for 6 years. In a previous existence, she had, instead of doing her itself, let her mother carry a container of milk for 6 miles. The Mudasravasavadi Vinaya, however, relates that Rahula was conceived on the evening of Prince Siddhartha's renunciation, and that he was born 6 years later on the day his father attained enlightenment. The Chinese translation of Yi Jing of the same Vinaya says, quote, "At the time, the Bodhisattva, as he amused himself in the palace, got to think, I now have 3 wives and 60,000 concubines. If I do not give them worldly pleasure, I am afraid that ordinary people will say that I am not a real man. I should now amuse myself with Yashodhara. Therefore, Yashodhara became pregnant." End of quotation. This story of Yashodhara's past birth in the Abhinishkramana Sutra was told by the Buddha himself when his father asks him to explain why his daughter-in-law had to carry a son for 6 years in her womb, because the people were contesting this, how can a woman bear a child for 6 years? So they were thinking Yashodhara had illicit relationships. So Buddha explains why it happened. According to Kashipyas, Rahula was 2 years old when his father left home to devote himself to austerity, and 15 years old when Buddha returned to Kapilavastu. Rahula thus had customarily 15 years of age when he became a Samanera. The Buddha Charita relates that Yashodhara, bearer of fame, begot a son named Rahula for Suddhodana's son. The birth of Rahula takes place in the palace when Siddhartha was entertained by women skilled with erotic art. Adding confusion to the chronological sequence, Ashwaghosa reports that Rahula's birth took place even before the Bodhisattva had the first 3 encounters, with the old man, and also with Vaidya, and also the sick man and the dead man. As discussed earlier, the Buddha Charita or some similar hitherto unknown text had some inspiration on the Panagiri. However, even in this sculpture, not only Rahula absent, but even Yashodhara is not depicted, since the Buddha Charita and since in the Buddha Charita, the birth of Rahula takes place long before the event of the Great Departure. In Andhra art, in all the sculptures depicting the Great Renunciation, the Bodhisattva alone is shown seated in despair in the midst of women lying as if dead. As a result, Gandharan artists do not attempt to depict Rahula at the moment when the Bodhisattva decided to leave palace in search of the truth. These sculptures, among many, depict Yashodhara, the Bodhisattva's wife, asleep on a high bed without any trace of his son. Unlike the paintings of Kandyan period and those of Southeast Asia, highly inspired by Pali Dharakatha, in Gandharan art, Rahula goes under the radar. That's right. So here I'm showing again the Bunir Stupa with the scenes of the life of the Buddha are put in a sequence. So you can see the encounter with the old man and the sick man, and then the Great Renunciation. You can see Yashodhara.
Stop. Resume slideshow. Students.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. It's okay. Right. So these are some of the sculptures I want to show you from Gandhara, where you have the renunciation scene, Buddha sleeping on the couch and Yashodhara behind. And normally, here Channa coming with the data. And again, another sculpture from Gandhara, we see very clearly that Siddhartha is seated on the couch and Yashodhara sleeping behind him. And this is one of the best sculptures I have seen on the episode. So there is no trace of Rahula. And again, this sculpture which is in Lahore Museum and the copy in the Indian Museum of Calcutta. And here, this is the point that I want to make. As we have discussed earlier, the many Sanskrit biographies of the Gautama Buddha have Rahula remaining in his mother's womb for 6 years until his father's enlightenment as the Buddha. If this hypothesis is correct, there is no need to depict the baby Rahula in the renunciation scene. Then question arises as to why the sleeping Yashodhara is depicted in a given of the Mulasavasthavadi Vinaya, that the Gandharan sculptors in depicting Yashodhara semi-nude are alluding to the conception of Rahula which took place just before the great departure. We can also propose another perhaps most likely hypothesis. It is the dream of Yashodhara on the day of Siddhartha's renunciation as recorded in the Lalita Vistara. This text relates that Yashodhara
This slide light goes now, just continue. We are recording, we will go.
okay. Can I go back?
Go back.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. So we can also propose another hypothesis, more likely, relevant, good one. It is that the dream of Yashodhara, as the day Siddhartha's renunciation as recorded in the Lalita Vistara. The text relates that Yashodhara in her sleep at midnight dreams the whole earth is shaken from the oceans to mountain peaks and the sun and moon and the stars fallen from the sky to the earth, and so forth. Extremely frightened by these bad omens, she asks her husband to explain their meaning, and to which the Bodhisattva consoles his wife, saying, quote, "Be happy and do not give into the sadness. Be joyous and give yourself in cheer. The omens are favorable for you." Quote ends. The Tibetan translation of the Abhinishramana Sutra also relates that Yashodhara was greatly troubled in her sleep and had 12 dreams which disturbed her exceedingly. Being unable to rest, Siddhartha turned to her and asked, "Why are you so restless and alarmed?" Answering her husband, she relates a dreadful dream in which a beautiful tree within the palace enclosure is blown down by the wind, and the moon and all the stars which surrounded it suddenly fall down and perish, and the sun with its glorious light disappears, and the entire world is left in pitch darkness. Hearing this, the Bodhisattva addresses her and says that the dreams are but the empty products of universal law, and requests that she return to her rest. Then Yashodhara, having heard the words of the prince, returned to her couch and slept, whilst the prince reposed by her side. The presence of the moon, sorry, the presence of the moon, the goddess with the present moon, and the wind god on some Gandharan reliefs may refer to the dream of Maya. So the next question we can ask is, I'll try to go fast now, but how much time I have?
Take your time.
It's okay, right? So when Yashodhara falls asleep, the prince suddenly wakes up and, seeing the total disarray of women, says to himself that only a fool is deserved by external beauty, that once the gaudy dress and jewels are removed, the wise man sees the vanity of all these fictitious charms, and just considers them as dream, a mirage of fantasy. Then the Bodhisattva summons Kantaka and asks him to bring the horse Kantaka to leave the palace and the misery of the delights to become a recluse. In this context, we are entitled to wonder whether or not in this very moment, for the Gandharan artists wish to highlight the great renunciation of the Bodhisattva Siddhartha together with the peaceful sleep of Yashodhara. If this assumption is correct, it is not surprising that the baby Rahula, son of the Bodhisattva Siddhartha, is absent from the scenes of the great renunciation in Gandharan art. The next question which I wish to examine is how the young prince left the palace well guarded by his father. So I stopped reading it and just comment the slides. So according to the Lalita Vistara, the Mahavastu, there is no doubt, since the palace was guarded by soldiers, the day that Siddhartha decides to leave the palace, the gods put everyone into sleep, and further precautions were taken that gods and yakshas carried the horse of the Siddhartha. So this is what we see in Gandharan art. The horse is carried, and future Buddha, the Bodhisattva, is seated on the horse, and Channa holding the chakra. Again, another one, the frontal scene, where you can see he's trying to escape from the palace. The gods are helping him, with Vaishravana, the god of the north, with him. So we will see how far we can go. For example, if I take you to Sanchi Stupa number 1, which can be dated to the 1st century BC, on the East Torana, we have a depiction of the Great Departure. So this was the Anabolic period. The Buddha was not depicted in human form, but by symbols. And we see the horse is carried by gods, but Buddha is not shown. But to symbolize the Buddha, you have a chatra, a parasol above him. So the gods are carrying the horse. So further we go with the panel, you know, the scenes are not separated like in Gandharanath. So horse continues, Buddha on the horse of Kantaka, and all of a sudden goats leave, and Siddhartha is getting down from the horse, and then he goes to the jungle. So here we can see the Sripada or the footprints of the Buddha, meaning that Buddha remained, and he asked Chanda or Chandaka to leave. So he bids farewell to the Buddha and he goes. So then the next one is the Kantaka is going back to the palace and no Chatra. So it is a symbolic depiction. And then we have in the middle Siddhartha after 6 years of mortification offering the first meal. So this goes back to Sanchi first century. And if you look at the Amaravati sculptures, again you have the Yakshas, Nagas carrying the horse. And of course, here the anthropomorphic image of the Bodhisattva is there. So he is riding the horse, Channa behind, holding the Chatra. But in the Nidhana Katha, it has a different story. The reason why I am telling this is that most of the art historians didn't understand because they never compared Gandharanath with the Sri Lankan art or Southeast Asian art, which is completely inspired by Pali texts. But in the Pali text, horse was not carried. Horse could fly. So Buddha says, let us go and ask Chanda to hold on to the tail, and it jumps over the walls. So this is what you see on the paintings. The god helps him to open the door, and then he jumps over the Niranjana and all the rivers, and so he could fly. And Chanda holding to the tail. This you will never see in Gandharanath, and you will never see in Amaravati, Nagarjunakonda. So these are some of the Kandyan period paintings that you see. You see the continuation of the 4 encounters, and then he decides to leave the palace and on the horse. The same tradition is respected. The Pali tradition is respected to a certain extent in the Thai and Burmese banners and paintings. Here, the god opens the door, so he still on the horse, he could leave. Now, this is the piece that we have exhibited in the Alonso Museum, where the two traditions are brought together. So the first thing is horse is carried according to Lalita Vistara, horse is carried by the gods, but Channa, instead of walking behind, he's hanging on to the tail. So the combination of two traditions, Pali and Sanskrit. So if you look at the Walter's banner, which is from Thailand, you can see the same thing, where the horse is carried, right? And then horse is carried and Channa is holding to the tail. Again, this is from Sri Lanka, from Hidagala temple. And again, you can see the Channa as a old man holding up to the tail. Again, another one here. Then there's another episode, this encounter, the first encounter with the Mara. If you look at the Gandharanath, not in Gandharanath, it's not depicted, but if you can look at the Lalita Vistara, Mara comes and to Bodhisattva and say, don't do this, don't leave, you become a Chakravarti, you will be a universal king, why you should leave? So this argument goes on, but it happens in the palace. But in the Pali tradition, when he was traveling in the air, while the horse was flying, Mara appears like here. And he says, in 3 weeks' time, you will become the universal king. Why are you doing stupid things? So then Buddha replies saying that I'm not interested in sovereignty. I'm not interested in becoming a Chakravarti. I want to find the way to escape from the death, old age, and the sickness. So here you can see in these paintings from the Walters, the island. Then again, we come back to the Pali tradition, where the encounter take place while he was flying with the horse. And again, another one. From Thailand, you can see Mara is trying to stop, and Bodhisattva arguing with him, saying that I'm not interested. And again, from the Alonso Museum, the one from Cambodia, and I can show you hundreds of banners, but I only selected few ones, where you have this discussion with the Bodhisattva and the Mara. But in Gandharan tradition, so horse was carried by the gods. When he left the palace, then horse just goes like ordinary horse. and he was Bodhisattva was riding the horse. Then comes the moment, the bidding farewell. So it is a part of the renunciation. Buddha takes off his jewelry, say go close, and hands them over to Channa and say go back to the palace and give them to my mother, Mahaprajapati. So this is what is depicted. So Kantaka bidding farewell, licking the feet of the Bodhisattva and Channa holding the jewelry. So you can see the same arrangement in the Buddhist stupa where here we have Channa with the chatra and Bodhisattva giving his jewelry. You can see the big necklace and then a horse bidding farewell. Same thing in Panaganali, where the Buddha is not depicted anthropomorphically, Buddha is depicted with the throne, and where you can see Channa licking the feet of the Buddha, future Buddha, and Channa and Kantaka going back. So same thing in Borobudur of the 9th century, following the final version of Lalita Visvara on the 7th century. You can see Bodhisattva standing and Channa looking back, and Kantaka looking back and Channa going with the jewelry. This is another one, very interesting one, again from Kanaganari, where you can see Kantaka coming back to the palace, and Channa gives the jewelry, and they were presented to Mahaprajapati. Mahaprajapati seeing the jewelry, she fainted and said, "I don't want to see these jewelry, put them in a lake." So this is what we see in the Sanskrit tradition. And this beautiful sculpture from Buddhara, where you can see Channa holding the jewelry, Kantaka looking at her, and she is weeping. So this is the stepmother of Siddhartha, not looking at the jewelry. So this is very clear in Gandhara art because it follows the description in the Lalita Visvara. So again, from the Buddhist stupa, which follows the chronological order, you can see she is lamenting, you can see the horse, and also the Channa. But the Pali tradition is different. So when Buddha says, "I'm going to leave the world, take my jewelry, and go back to the palace," Kantaka hears the story. And he says, "I'm not going to see my master again." So he collapses and dies. So there is no way that Kantaka goes back to the palace. This episode is completely eliminated from the Pali text. So this is what we see in the Kandyan period paintings. So he dies here. And also, of course, this is from Indevela. And even from the Thai tradition. So you can see Kantaka is dead and Channa is weeping. So that means Kantaka never went back to the palace. Again, another one. This is another painting from Cambodia. You can see Kantaka with the yellow frame. He's weeping. So again, another this panel. So it's very clear in the Pali text that Kantaka dies on the spot, and he never went back to the palace. But in Gandhara art, he goes back to the palace. We don't know what happened to him. So here is another one. You can see it's a beautiful Kantaka death. So to conclude with all these obstructions we had, yeah. So in conclusion, I wish to emphasize that the stories of Shakyamuni Buddha narrated in Sanskrit texts must be read cautiously. For over time, the texts have been altered and their final versions do not always correspond to the iconographic reality. The changes made to the sacred texts led to contradictions that make their iconographic representations even more confusing. In the past, many art historians have given credence to Sanskrit texts when analyzing the life story of the Buddha. Yet, I have tried to demonstrate in this brief presentation the impact of the Pali tradition not only in Sri Lanka, but also in Southeast Asia cannot be denied. Furthermore, one can no longer deny the existence of various texts completely lost today or to be discovered in the future, such as the Gandhari manuscripts predating the Buddha Charita, the Lalita Visvara, and other Sanskrit texts. As Richard Solomon correctly predicted, I quote him, it is no longer no exaggeration to say that we are living and working in a golden age of Buddhist studies, and there is every reason to hope that this golden age will continue for many years. Quotation ends. It's all right. It's okay. It's okay. Right. So, our Guruji and the good friend whose memory we evoke today would have liked to hear these words. It is to his memory that I humbly dedicate this talk, and in hope that the young generation will take up the torch of light and honor his memory. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for your talk. And now I personally thank all the people who have joined online. And on behalf of this department, I apologize for this technical difficulties what we encountered during this talk. So we'll try to rectify all the things in our next events. So may I now request my young colleague, Dr. Suken Shah, to deliver formal vote of thanks.
Respected invited guests, friends, and students, on behalf of the Department of Ancient Indian History, Culture, and Archaeology, it is my privilege to propose vote of thanks for Professor V.D. Chattopadhyaya Memorial Lecture Series. I would take the opportunity to thank our distinguished guest and speaker, Professor Osman Bupiarshi, for not only sparing his valuable time for us, but also for enlightening us with a commendable talk. It is always a pleasure to listen to you at various platforms. It was wonderful to listen to your experiences with Professor V.D. Chattopadhyaya. Your holistic approach to understand the great departure left a great impact on us. Your observations on the contradictions and confusions in text and images was really mesmerizing. Your understandings on the intriguing narratives on the images of Buddha meditating is really remarkable. We all enjoyed the way you narrated the narratives. It was really a great pleasure to listen to a scholar who have inspired generations of students of numismatics and artistry. So your presence has made the event unforgettable, and we also look forward to host you again. Thank you once again. I also would like to thank our guest, Professor Sushmita Basu Majumdar, for visiting us and joining us in the lecture. I also take the opportunity to thank the distinguished guests who joined online, such as Mr. Sanjeev Kumar, Professor Suchindra Ghosh, Professor Crowdine, Professor Dukhor, Professor Sanjay Acharya, and all the other guests. My sincere apologies if I've missed any names. We thank everyone, and we would like everyone to participate in future events as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. And students, they have arranged a cup of tea outside.